Beneath the victories etched into monuments and textbooks lies another war, one fought in silence and sealed in archives. It is a war of missing files, vanished convoys, and operations erased before they could be admitted. These are not stories of triumph, but of shadows, where loyalty blurred, technology slipped into hidden hands, and the line between ally and enemy dissolved. To open these pages is to awaken what was never meant to be spoken aloud. On April 28, 1945, just 10 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, a series of transmissions were intercepted by US Army Signal Corps units attached to the 7th Army as they advanced through southern Bavaria. The signals referenced Transportgruppe E7, a convoy operating under the codename Operation Eclipse. What the Allied monitors could not determine then, and what remains unresolved to this day, is what that convoy was carrying, and why no official after-action records survived. Eyewitness accounts begin in the small town of Mittenwald, nestled at the base of the Karwendel Range. Residents recalled columns of camouflage trucks moving south, accompanied by Waffen-SS troops in black-field uniforms, even as local Wehrmacht units surrendered. One farmer, later interviewed in a 1953 CIC report, described seeing wooden crates banded in steel, loaded under tarpaulin covers, guarded more heavily than ammunition trucks. The convoy turned east toward Garmisch-Partenkirchen, but beyond that, the trail ends abruptly. Declassified fragments from US Army archival file AR 7A 4677, originally marked restricted, reference a patrol from the 401th Infantry Regiment that attempted to intercept the convoy near Oberammergau. The unit's logbook mentions heavy resistance from fanatical SS elements protecting an unknown transport. The skirmish was short, and though the Americans reported casualties, the final entry reads, "Convoy disappeared into dense forest terrain. Unable to pursue further. Command ordered withdrawal. Subsequent references redacted." What happened in those forests remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the war's final days. Speculation arose almost immediately within Allied intelligence. Colonel Robert S. Allen, G2 staff officer attached to General Patton's Third Army, noted in his unpublished diary that Eclipse may involve special cargo destined for Alpine Fortress. The so-called Alpenfestung was a Nazi myth, largely propaganda, but it fueled fears among US command that remnants of the regime were stockpiling weapons or preparing for a last-ditch resistance. That concern was enough to justify hasty orders, but it does not explain the subsequent disappearance of records or the convoy itself. What little remains of the paper trail is chilling. A May 1945 cable from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, recovered decades later from the National Archives, referenced sensitive material removed under Eclipse, recommends suppression until further notice. The document bore the signature of Alan Dulles, then station chief in Bern, Switzerland. Dulles had been instrumental in negotiating the German surrender in northern Italy, and his connections to both surrendering Wehrmacht officers and industrialists have long raised questions about what deals were struck in those chaotic days. German testimonies collected after the war shed more light, though not enough to form a complete picture. Former SS Hauptsturmführer Karl Friedrich Albers, interrogated during the Nuremberg trials, stated under oath that he had been tasked with securing special transport from Peenemünde to secure location in Bavaria. When pressed for details, he invoked secrecy orders issued directly from Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler. Albers later retracted parts of his testimony, and when he was found dead in 1948 in a Hamburg apartment, officially a suicide, the trail went cold again. Theories about the convoy's cargo remain varied, yet disturbingly plausible. One line of inquiry suggests it contained advanced aircraft components from the Messerschmitt Me 262 or the experimental Horten Ho 229 jet program. Allied intelligence was already racing to capture such technologies, which would later fuel both American and Soviet jet development. Another theory points to chemical or biological munitions, specifically canisters of tabun nerve agent manufactured at Diehoen Firth. These were known to have been stockpiled in late 1944, and fears of their dispersal haunted Allied planners. Still others whisper about files, archival records of war crimes, financial transactions, or intelligence operations that would have implicated both Axis collaborators and future Cold War power brokers. The physical environment offers only silence. In the dense woods between Ettel and Oberammergau, locals still speak of sealed tunnels carved into the mountainsides, entrances later blasted shut by retreating troops or by Allied engineers. An unmarked bunker discovered in 1962 contained rusted SS helmets, decayed uniforms, and a handful of empty crates stenciled with serial numbers matching Luftwaffe procurement codes. Nothing of substance remained inside. Declassified in 1998, a memorandum from the US Army Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, dated August 1946, attempted to consolidate all available reports. It listed eyewitness testimony, missing trucks, and unexplained gaps in the 7th Army's field records. The conclusion read, "Unable to establish final disposition of Eclipse transports. Recommend permanent classification." For reasons never fully explained, the file was reclassified top secret again in 1952 during the height of the Cold War. Some historians argue that this timing indicates the cargo may have been transferred into US custody, its origin concealed, to protect intelligence gains against the Soviet Union. That possibility raises troubling questions. If the convoy did not vanish into the Alps, but instead was intercepted quietly and absorbed into Allied hands, then why were witnesses silenced and records destroyed? Was it to conceal the possession of illegal chemical agents? To erase evidence of clandestine negotiations with SS officers? Or was it to protect Western industrial and political figures implicated in the files? None of these explanations have ever been substantiated, yet each fits within the shadows left behind. In 1974, investigative journalist Heinz Schott published a series of articles in Der Spiegel alleging that the convoy had reached an underground facility near the Zugspitze, Germany's highest peak. Schott claimed his sources included retired Bundeswehr officers who had once worked alongside American military engineers in the region. His reporting suggested that at least some of the material was flown out of Germany aboard US Army Air Forces C-47 transports. Within weeks of publication, Schott retracted his claims under what colleagues later described as extraordinary pressure. Today, more than 70 years later, the Eclipse convoy remains one of the unsolved riddles of the war's closing hours. The silence of official archives is deafening. The fragments that do exist point only to deliberate obfuscation. Like so many other wartime mysteries, the fate of missing U-boats, the relocation of looted art, the disappearance of classified files, its truth lies in the void left by erased documents and sealed tunnels. Whether the convoy carried weapons, technology, or secrets too explosive to reveal, its absence has become as telling as its presence once was. The forests of Bavaria remain quiet now. Tourists hike the same trails where soldiers once marched, oblivious to what may lie buried beneath. But in forgotten file drawers and shuttered vaults, the spectre of Operation Eclipse lingers, a ghost of a war that refused to end cleanly, haunting the uneasy silence between the battles we remember and the secrets we are never meant to know. In the summer of 1945, as Europe struggled to emerge from the ruins of total war, a set of confiscated Soviet intelligence files surfaced in the possession of MI6. The documents, marked with the cryptic designation Otdel 5, translated simply as Department V, described an elite unit embedded behind Allied lines during the final years of the war. Their purpose: targeted elimination of officers, sabotage of command structures, and manipulation of intelligence traffic to destabilize Allied operations. Though the Red Army denied the unit's existence, the files painted a disturbing picture of a shadow war waged within the larger conflict. The origin of Department 5 is traced in one surviving memorandum, dated October 1943, signed by NKVD Deputy Commissar Pavel Sudoplatov. It references a special detachment, skilled in foreign languages and trained in close-quarters assassination, to be deployed in occupied France and Belgium. The timing coincided with the build-up to the Allied invasion of Western Europe, suggesting that Moscow anticipated not only a German collapse, but also the possibility of friction with its supposed allies. The very existence of such a program undermined the public narrative of trust between the Allied powers. The MI6 cache came into British hands through Operation Rusty Gate, a little-known seizure of Soviet communication equipment abandoned in Czechoslovakia. Among the crates was a bundle of typewritten reports, badly water-damaged, but still legible in parts. One page, stamped Sovershchenna Sekretno, top secret, listed 10 names with accompanying code numbers. At least 4 of the names matched suspicious wartime deaths of Allied officers. Captain Henry Brewster of the US 82nd Airborne was found shot outside Sainte-Mère-Église in June 1944, his death attributed to German snipers despite no enemy presence in the area. Colonel Jean-Luc Dufresne of the Free French Forces perished in a mysterious automobile accident near Caen. Both names appeared in the Soviet list. Further evidence emerged from debriefings of captured German Abwehr officers. In September 1945, Reinhard Gehlen, the former Wehrmacht intelligence chief for the Eastern Front, claimed that his service had intercepted Soviet radio traffic referencing V-Einsätze, V operations, as early as late 1944. He described them as acts of elimination carried out in enemy rear areas, attributed to German resistance but coordinated by Soviet operatives. While Gehlen's testimony was colored by his eagerness to ingratiate himself with the Americans, it aligned disturbingly well with the Department WWII papers. Within British intelligence, the discovery caused immediate unease. An internal MI6 memorandum, dated November 2, 1945, preserved in the Kew archives, reads, "Department V files confirm hostile action against Allied command structures, possibly ongoing. Must avoid public disclosure to prevent rupture of post-war settlement." The directive was clear. The files were to be locked under ultra-secret, accessible only to senior intelligence staff. When, in December 1945, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin asked for a briefing on alleged Soviet activities in Normandy, the Cabinet minutes note only, "Matter deferred, no further action required." Eyewitness testimony is scarce, but chilling when it does appear. In 1947, an American counterintelligence officer named Major Richard Kendall privately recorded his recollection of investigating the unexplained death of Brigadier General Charles Keane in Antwerp, December 1944. Keane had been found in his hotel room, apparently the victim of a cerebral hemorrhage. Yet Kendall noted puncture marks near the general's neck, inconsistent with natural death. His report was submitted to SHAF headquarters, only to vanish from official records. Kendall, in his memoir published decades later, wrote, "I was told in no uncertain terms that the general died of natural causes. End of file." When asked if he believed Department 5 was responsible, Kendall replied simply, "Yes." The true scope of Department V's operations remains unknowable. Of the 25 incidents cross-referenced by British analysts in 1945, at least 8 involved deaths of senior Allied officers in circumstances that could not be fully explained by enemy action. Yet attempts to trace operatives ended in dead ends. Suspected couriers in France vanished. Informants in Belgium recanted under mysterious circumstances. By 1946, nearly every lead had dried up, leaving behind only fragments of reports and a thick cloud of silence. The secrecy surrounding Department V was not solely about Soviet duplicity. There were deeper implications. If Moscow had indeed carried out assassinations of Allied officers, then the seeds of the Cold War were sown not in 1947 with the Truman Doctrine, but in the hedgerows of Normandy and the streets of Antwerp. Worse still, some in London and Washington feared that exposure of Soviet treachery could fracture the fragile post-war alliance during the very moment negotiations over Germany's occupation and Eastern Europe's fate were underway. In that light, suppression of the files was not mere caution, it was deliberate political strategy. By the early 1950s, as East-West relations hardened, References to Department V reappeared in intelligence assessments. CIA briefings to the National Security Council in 1952 mention Soviet legacy assassination capabilities, first demonstrated in Western Europe under wartime Department V operations. Yet no operational files were ever released to corroborate the statement. In Britain, all related documentation remained sealed until at least 2045 under Official Secrets Act provisions. Even now, most of the surviving papers consist of redacted fragments, their most sensitive details blotted out in thick black ink. Historians who have pieced together the trail face a frustrating puzzle. On one hand, the fragmentary Soviet files, Galen's testimony, and unexplained Allied deaths point toward a disturbing reality: that Stalin's intelligence services were willing to eliminate supposed partners in pursuit of post-war dominance. On the other hand, the absence of hard evidence allows skeptics to dismiss Department V as a Cold War exaggeration or disinformation planted by defectors. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, hidden in burned files, buried testimonies, and locked archives. For families of the officers who died, the mystery offers no closure. In Normandy, a small plaque commemorates Colonel Dufresne, attributing his death to enemy action. In the United States, Captain Brewster's name is etched on the Normandy American Cemetery wall, his fate explained as a sniper's bullet. Neither inscription hints at the darker possibility that their lives were ended not by Germans, but by supposed allies. That silence may be the most enduring legacy of Department V, a war fought in shadows, erased before it could be acknowledged, yet echoing through the long decades of mistrust that followed. What remains today are whispers in declassified reports, scattered names in forgotten files, and a gnawing absence of answers. Department V has no monuments, no official recognition, no admission from Moscow. But in the cold corridors of intelligence history, its spectre persists, an invisible hand that reached across the lines of alliance, struck down its own partners, and vanished back into the void of denied archives. In the winter of 1945, as the Red Army swept through Lower Silesia, Soviet reconnaissance patrols stumbled upon a labyrinth of tunnels carved into the Owl Mountains near Waldenburg, today Wałbrzych, Poland. The site was part of Project Riese, a vast SS construction program begun in 1943 under the organization TOT. Officially, historians have long described it as an unfinished headquarters for Hitler or an underground weapons factory. Yet declassified Allied reports hint at something more disturbing. Machinery discovered in its chambers that seem to defy contemporary wartime technology. The most detailed accounts come from fragments of OSS field reports filed by Captain Harold Wexler, attached to the 26th and 77th Regiment OSS detachment. His dispatch of June 19, 1945, marked "Confidential," describes entering a reinforced cavern structure of considerable scale, with power conduits extending into sealed chambers. Within one chamber were objects resembling turbine assemblies, but with no identifiable fuel or exhaust systems. The report concludes with the chilling line: "Machinery does not conform to any known German industrial classification. Recommend immediate technical assessment." Weeks later, Wexler's subsequent communications ceased. His final known cable simply read, "Shipment secured, destination undisclosed." Polish miners who were conscripted into forced labor during the war offered parallel testimony. In interviews conducted by the Polish government in 1947, several recalled transporting heavy crates, often under SS guard, into shafts near the village of Jugowitz. One recalled hearing German engineers refer to Hochdruckversuchsgerät, high-pressure test devices. Another described seeing machines with glass-like tubes glowing faint blue when powered. These accounts were dismissed by Polish authorities at the time as exaggeration or trauma-induced confusion, yet they align eerily with the OSS description. The German overseers of the project left few surviving records. Documents recovered in Berlin after the war included a letter dated September 1944 from SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the engineer who oversaw both V-2 rocket production and numerous underground facilities. The letter referenced urgent relocation of sensitive components from Peenemünde to Lower Silesia under strictest secrecy. Kammler disappeared in May 1945 under circumstances never clarified. Some claim suicide, others believe he was captured and quietly absorbed into Allied custody. His fate remains entwined with the shadows of Riese. American efforts to investigate the complex were limited by Soviet control of the region. Yet declassified US Army technical intelligence reports reveal that in July 1945, a small detachment managed to inspect one of the unfinished shafts before being expelled by Soviet authorities. Their notes mention power distribution panels beyond German wartime capability, including wiring labeled with unfamiliar technical markings. The samples were shipped to Frankfurt for study, but the corresponding lab reports have never been found in US archives. A handwritten marginal note on one surviving memorandum simply states, "Classified beyond T-Force. Do not circulate." The Soviets, for their part, sealed most of the Riese tunnels almost immediately. A 1946 Soviet Army engineering report, released briefly in the 1990s after the collapse of the USSR, described finding unassembled apparatus of unknown function in one chamber, along with stacks of technical documents that were removed to Moscow. The report concluded, material potentially significant for future aviation propulsion systems. No further reference to those documents has surfaced. Russian archives today remain closed on the matter, with access requests denied on grounds of state security. Local folklore filled the silence left by classified reports. Residents of the Al Mountains spoke of trucks moving under cover of night, even after the German capitulation. Some insisted they saw Soviet vehicles removing equipment into the 1950s. In 1962, amateur explorers discovered a sealed chamber near Riese containing rusted crane equipment and rail tracks leading into collapsed rock. Among the debris was a fragment of metal tubing inscribed with serial numbers, inconsistent with any known German wartime manufacturing code. The artifact disappeared after being handed to local authorities, never catalogued in any museum. The Riese mystery resurfaced in Cold War intelligence briefings. A CIA estimate from 1957, declassified only in 2004, noted unconfirmed reports of Soviet jet propulsion breakthroughs linked to German wartime experimental sites in Lower Silesia. The same estimate mentions the disappearance of Captain Wexler's OSS team, suggesting that not only machinery, but also technical experts may have been absorbed into classified programs. Whether this was deliberate obfuscation or genuine uncertainty remains unclear, but the timing coincided with sudden Soviet advances in high-altitude jet engines. The Polish government reopened the tunnels in the 1970s as part of historical research. Excavations revealed extensive concrete galleries, unfinished chambers, and rusted construction equipment, but no trace of the anomalous machinery. Official publications framed Riese as an aborted Nazi engineering folly, grandiose, costly, and ultimately useless. Yet whispers persisted in military circles. Retired Polish army officers privately described classified briefings, warning them never to disclose American and Soviet interest in the 1945 findings. Even today, sections of the complex remain sealed, with official signage warning of instability and collapse. The story of Project Riese raises more questions than it answers. Why were OSS files on the site systematically destroyed in the war, Department Fire of 1973, with only scattered references surviving? Why did Soviet engineers describe unassembled apparatus, yet never disclose their findings publicly? What became of the technical components that disappeared under the designation "shipment secured"? And why, more than 7 decades later, do both American and Russian archives still treat the subject as a matter of national security? Some historians dismiss the darker interpretations, arguing that the tunnels were merely an ambitious, but doomed, Nazi construction project. Yet others point to the circumstantial evidence, Kammler's disappearance, the missing OSS reports, and the secrecy maintained long after the war's end. They argue that something of value, whether advanced prototypes, incomplete experimental devices, or simply documentation, was hidden in the Owl Mountains, spirited away before the war's rubble had settled. Today, tourists walk the same concrete passages that once echoed with the clatter of forced labor and the urgency of SS engineers. Guided tours present the site as a grim monument to Nazi ambition. But deep within the mountain, behind sealed walls and unexplored shafts, the unanswered questions linger. Was Project Riese merely a failed dream of subterranean fortresses? Or was it the burial ground of machinery whose existence was too dangerous to acknowledge? In the silence of the tunnels, history has left only shadows and the persistent suspicion that what was found there was never meant to be known. In November 1951, as the Korean War raged along the frozen banks of the Yalu River, a reconnaissance patrol from the US 7th Infantry Division reported an unusual discovery. Hidden in a ravine near a bombed-out railway spur lay several steel containers marked with faded stencils, German text, eagle insignias, and manufacturing dates stamped 1944. Their recovery, documented only in restricted intelligence cables, set off a chain of events later buried under the codename File Red Sun. The patrol, led by Lieutenant Raymond Holbrook, was tasked with surveying enemy supply routes when they stumbled upon the containers. According to Holbrook's after-action report, fragments of the crates bore inscriptions such as Messerschmitt AG Augsburg and Geheime Entwicklung, secret development. Inside were water-damaged blueprints, partially intact, depicting advanced jet propulsion systems and fuel injection schematics unfamiliar to the American engineers who first examined them. The discovery seemed out of place. Why would German crates from 1944 be buried in North Korea 7 years later? The containers were quickly transported to a forward logistics depot under heavy guard. From there, records suggest they were flown to Yokota Air Base in Japan aboard a C-1119 transport plane. Within days, orders from Far East Command sealed the incident under eyes only. Holbrook and his men were reassigned, their patrol logs stripped of the find. In one surviving cable dated December 3, 1951, General Matthew Ridgway's headquarters noted, "Recovered materials exhibit technical significance. Handle under Red Sun classification. Personnel exposure limited to cleared engineering staff." The technical significance lay in what the documents described. Declassified fragments of engineering notes show schematics for a variable thrust turbojet assembly far beyond operational designs of 1944. American analysts remarked on the similarity to concepts later pursued in the Soviet MiG-19 and MiG-21 programs, aircraft that would soon dominate Cold War skies. The possibility that Nazi research had been funneled through the Soviet Union and re-emerged in Korea unsettled US commanders. Yet the matter never appeared in public reports, and the crates themselves vanished into classified custody. Holbrook's testimony, preserved in a taped interview conducted in 1971 with a congressional investigator, offers the only unfiltered eyewitness account. He recalled, "Those weren't standard blueprints. Pages were covered in notations we couldn't read. German shorthand, engineering marks I'd never seen. The officers who took the crates said they belonged to a different war, one we weren't supposed to ask about." Holbrook claimed his men were warned under threat of court-martial never to speak of the discovery. Most complied. By the time his testimony surfaced, nearly all of the patrol had died, their service records noting nothing. Unusual. The official record, what little survives, is riddled with contradictions. A December 1951 report from the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base mentions German-origin aeronautical documents recovered in Far East Theater, but the report's attachments are missing. A year later, a memorandum from the Joint Chiefs of Staff referenced Red Sun materials integrated into ongoing propulsion evaluations. No follow-up exists. The designation Red Sun disappears entirely from Pentagon. Indexing after 1953, the same year of the Korean Armistice Agreement. Soviet archives, glimpsed briefly after the USSR's collapse, complicate the picture further. A declassified 1952 GRU intelligence bulletin, discovered by Polish researchers in the early 1990s, claimed, American units have seized technical archives lost during German evacuation of 1945. Strong probability that these were intended for Soviet custody. The bulletin speculated that the crates were remnants of German scientists transferred east under Operation Ossowiecim, the Soviet equivalent of America's Operation Paperclip. If true, the question becomes, how did such cargo end up in the Korean mountains, exposed to discovery? One theory suggests deliberate planting. By late 1951, both superpowers were engaged in shadow operations, probing each other's technological capabilities. Some historians argue that Soviet handlers may have staged the crates as disinformation, bait for the Americans to chase phantom German technologies. Yet the technical drawings detail and their similarity to later Soviet designs argues against simple deception. Others contend that retreating Soviet forces may have abandoned the containers in haste, never intending them to be found. The consequences of Red Sun echo in aviation history. Within 5 years of the crate's discovery, both American and Soviet jet programs advanced rapidly. The US Air Force unveiled the F-104 Starfighter in 1954, boasting unprecedented speeds. Meanwhile, Soviet MiG fighters appeared with engine features strikingly similar to the recovered blueprints. Was this parallel development? Or had both powers drawn from the same hidden wartime reservoir of German research, scattered across continents in the chaos of 1945? By the late 1960s, whispers of Red Sun had filtered into defense circles. An internal Rand Corporation paper from 1968, declassified decades later, speculated, if Red Sun involved advanced German propulsion research, the secrecy surrounding it suggests it was deemed strategically decisive. Implications include concealed exploitation of Axis scientific archives by both East and West. The paper's authors noted that the absence of a complete archive in either nation's official records was itself evidence of intentional suppression. What became of the crates remains unresolved. No official storage facility claims custody. No museum has displayed them. Some suggest they were shipped to Fort Detrick or Wright-Patterson, vanishing into the same void as other recovered Axis technology. Others claim they were destroyed to prevent legal or ethical controversy surrounding the use of wartime research. The most conspiratorial voices insist that fragments survive, quietly integrated into classified propulsion programs well into the Cold War. For Lieutenant Holbrook, the discovery marked a turning point he never escaped. His reassignment ended, his combat role, and he retired quietly in 1959. When asked in his final interview whether the crates had influenced the Cold War, he responded, "I don't know what they contained, but I know we weren't supposed to find them. We were told history had no place for what was inside." His words, like the crates themselves, disappeared into silence. More than 70 years later, the Korean hills show no trace of the steel containers once hidden there. The Yalu River runs quiet, its waters concealing countless relics of a war many prefer to forget. Yet somewhere in the classified vaults of Washington or Moscow, or perhaps lost forever in the chaos of retreat, lies the answer to File Red Sun. A reminder that the ghosts of the Second World War did not die in 1945, but followed the world into the next conflict, hidden inside forgotten crates beneath a frozen sky. In March 1952, French intelligence officers stationed in Algiers intercepted a series of encrypted radio transmissions, unlike the routine traffic of nationalist rebels or colonial authorities. The signals, triangulated to the remote stretches of the Algerian Sahara, carried code phrases in German, not French or Arabic. The decrypts spoke of transport columns, secured cargo, and an operational codename, Kommando Donner. What followed was an investigation buried in NATO's restricted files, hinting at the survival of Axis evacuation plans long after the war had officially ended. The earliest leads emerged from local reports. French gendarmes patrolling near Beni Abbès described sighting convoys of unmarked trucks moving under the desert moonlight. Witnesses claimed the vehicles bore no insignia, but the drivers spoke in harsh, guttural accents that the locals recognized as German. One Tuareg nomad, questioned in a 1953 French military interrogation, described men in old uniforms, their insignias torn away, guarding trains that disappeared into caves beneath the desert rock. His account was dismissed at the time as superstition, yet his details, accurate descriptions of German Mauser rifles and Wehrmacht-style helmets, suggested otherwise. The most compelling evidence came from documents recovered in Marseille during a raid on a suspected smuggling ring in late 1952. Among seized papers was a folder marked Donner 1945, containing typed German memoranda signed by an SS officer, Oberstleutnant Erich Neumann. The papers outlined an evacuation plan drafted in February 1945, ordering the relocation of classified research personnel and industrial prototypes to secure sites beyond continental Europe. One annotated map included routes through Vichy North Africa, specifically Algeria, then still under French control. Though Neumann himself was never found, his name absent from Allied prisoner lists, the plan suggested that a portion of Germany's wartime resources had indeed been diverted. The French SDECU, Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage, launched an inquiry under the internal designation Dossier D72. Field teams dispatched to investigate rail lines in southern Algeria reported discovering sealed tunnels near the Hogga Mountains, large enough to conceal armored trains. The tunnels bore signs of post-war use, fuel drums stamped with production dates as late as 1948, and tire tracks leading into collapsed entrances. Yet each time investigators drew close, their work was halted by sudden orders from Paris. An internal memo dated July 1953 noted tersely, "Further exploration suspended, NATO consultation required." Why NATO? That question lingers to this day. Declassified correspondence from the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, reveals that reports of Kommando Donner were quietly circulated among US and British intelligence as early as 1952. One heavily redacted cable from General Alfred Grunther, Eisenhower's deputy at SHAPE, instructed, "Do not engage subject Donner publicly. Treat as sensitive Allied matter, potential implications with ongoing paperclip integration." The reference to Operation Paperclip, America's secret recruitment of German scientists, suggests the convoys may have carried not only material, but personnel whose allegiance had shifted to the West. The Soviets were not blind to the rumors. A 1954 GRU bulletin intercepted by French intelligence accused NATO of harboring remnants of fascist technical cadres in North Africa. Moscow propaganda outlets soon broadcast lurid stories of Nazi gold trains hidden in the Sahara. But the overlap between fiction and the fragmentary Donner files made it impossible to separate disinformation from concealed reality. French authorities, caught between colonial unrest and NATO secrecy, chose silence. Yet fragments of truth continued to surface. In 1961, during the height of the Algerian War of Independence, a FLN rebel commander reported attacking what he described as a foreign convoy moving south of Tamanrasset. According to his debriefing after capture, the vehicles fought with weapons older than the war we were fighting. His fighters destroyed one truck, only to discover inside it metal, crates filled with papers stamped with German writing. The surviving crates were allegedly confiscated by French paratroopers, and the incident was buried under military censorship. No official record was ever released. Historians who have examined what little remains of Dossier D72 believe Kommando Donner was conceived as a last-ditch SS plan to safeguard both technology and wealth. By early 1945, with Germany collapsing, North Africa represented an accessible evacuation corridor, still dotted with Vichy sympathizers, established supply lines, and remote deserts where operations could vanish without trace. The notion of ghost convoys continuing into the 1950s may seem implausible, yet the intercepted signals, witness testimony, and seized documents point to activity well beyond the war's end. the material reportedly transported raises equally troubling questions. Some analysts argue the convoys carried looted art and gold reserves, smuggled from occupied Europe and hidden in desert caches. Others suggest that documents and prototypes, jet engines, chemical research, or nuclear notes from projects like Uraanvrien were the true cargo, kept beyond the reach of both Soviets and Western allies until their value could be traded. More unsettling are the testimonies indicating personnel transfers, engineers, technicians, even SS officers, hidden in plain sight under NATO's expanding Cold War umbrella. By 1962, with Algerian independence imminent, French intelligence sealed Dossier D-72 and transferred its contents to NATO archives in Brussels. Researchers attempting to access the file in the 1980s were told it had been misplaced. Today, no official record of Kommando Donner exists in open archives. Only scattered memoranda, seized documents, and witness accounts survive, tantalizing fragments of a history carefully scrubbed. For locals, the legends endure. In the Hoggar Mountains, elders still tell stories of trains that roared beneath the desert, guarded by pale-skinned men speaking foreign tongues. In Beni Abbes, rumors persist of sealed tunnels filled with rusting vehicles and crates that no one dares open. French veterans of the colonial army, interviewed in the 1970s, spoke cautiously of convoys that were not ours and orders to look the other way. One retired officer admitted, "We were told they were allies who preferred to remain unseen." The truth of Kommando Donner remains buried beneath sand and silence. Was it a logistical ghost story born of Cold War paranoia, or the final movement of a Nazi evacuation plan that outlived the Reich itself? Without access to the lost files, the answer may never be known. Yet the whispers persist, of convoys moving under the desert stars, of crates sealed against time, of a war whose shadows stretched far beyond 1945 into the forgotten corners of another continent. The echoes of the Second World War did not fade with its gunfire. They seeped into the Cold War, into governments, and into the silence of locked vaults. What remains are fragments, half-burned documents, whispered testimony, and scars buried beneath the ground. Yet silence does not erase truth. It waits, heavy and patient, like the weight of a sealed crate, daring us to ask whether the past was ever truly defeated or only hidden away.